Well, I just want to thank you all for joining me today on this broadcast, this supercast, as we call it. We've done this for several years, where we bring together thinkers and speakers from all over the world to talk into relevant topics. I think of the word relevance quite a bit because it is, I think, interesting. I was interviewed this last week, and someone asked me in the interview, what do you believe to be the number one challenge of architecture? And this is a non-architect business person, very high finance dude, runs a very large private equity firm that you would know if I stated it. And I said, relevance. Relevance to me is the number one challenge in the profession. And he goes, oh, artificial intelligence. I said it was a challenge before AI, at the end of the day. And it comes down to how architects, first of all, perceive their own value. And of course, we have for far too long found our value in our drawings, not in our thinkings or the value creation that we generate through the work that is done. And it was a great conversation. And so I think about our conversation here today. We're going to be talking around this relevant topic of what I'm calling forgotten relevance. And are we at a place in our practice of architecture where there are things that we have left behind or forgotten somewhere along the way in our pursuit of the shiny new, in our pursuit of false relevance, and are therefore diminishing the way we work? And I don't know. I want to hear from you. You are all three at this arc in your career, which is so fantastic, and have different roles in that. And I'm anxious to hear you respond to my kind of challenge question, where are we? Catherine Peel, we're anxious to hear from you on your response to this question about forgotten relevance.
Well, thank you, Dave. I'm looking forward to this conversation with all of you. And, I spent some time talking with some of our other senior professionals at my firm that have been practicing architecture for decades to really pose the question of what have we lost? And I think many of us, miss some aspects of what you might call the good old days of practicing architecture, rigorous training, internships, really learning from master architects about how to put a building together, along with those endless overtime hours in the pursuit of the best design work. And I think most of us can agree that many aspects of that culture absolutely needed to be lost. And we've obviously been in a major pivot point exacerbated by COVID, but I think driven in part by our younger professionals that they aren't going to buy into that sort of draconian fountainhead approach to architecture. They're just not buying it. So what I believe has been lost or is in the process of lost is that very individualistic and competitive approach to architecture. I think we're moving more towards a team-based, collaborative and more expansive orientation that's more focused on the future, which I think is a good thing for sure. And you talk about the relevance, Dave, and some of you are probably familiar with the book, The Future of the Professions, by Richard and Daniel Susskind. I just heard him speak earlier this year. And he talk about how technology is going to transform the work of human experts. One of the main premises of his book, or their book, is that while we're living in an internet society, our traditional professions, such as architecture, are still very unaffordable. They're antique, they're opaque, and they're underperformed compared to the promise of where technology could have or should have taken us by this point in time. And the Susskinds believe that architecture needs to move from a bespoke sort of one-at-a-time design building to a place of decompensation where many craftsmen and technicians can take on aspects of the work that are routine and can become even more standardized. And that if we don't get there, That premise is that we're never going to be able to solve the really wicked problems of the world, such as attainable housing or healthcare equity or zero carbon construction. And so until we can open up our profession to the full promise of technology and quite honestly start crowdsourcing really more of our work, then eventually we are going to lose relevance, and the Googles or the Apples or the Metas are going to break down those barriers, and we could very much be left empty-handed, as you said earlier. But coming back to the main question of what has been lost, I would say for me, two things really come to mind, not necessarily just connected with architecture, but in general to the work that we all do. And I don't know if you're familiar with the book Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, and his subject is that, we just can't pay attention any longer. And I think humans have come to the realization the past few decades that we have all simultaneously lost our ability to focus deeply. And we have so many different ways of communicating that we're now overwhelming our neural systems. And, we get an addiction that, we can hit a novel every few minutes or every few seconds. And so the result is we can only focus on something for like an average of 3 minutes of time. And what does this say about our future? Again, when we need to be able to focus more deeply on the creative sides of when we maybe have technology that can do other things for us. And then I think secondly is really just lost connection, lost deep connection with each other. Again, we have so many different ways to connect with Instagram and email and Teams channels, but I feel like these casual interactions have taken the place of really deep human connection. And have we abandoned our natural social instincts as we are now living in cut off small groups, more disconnected from greater society? I don't know what you guys are seeing, but I don't see my friends and associates as much as I did before COVID. And that, along with technology, even though we have more ways to connect, I feel like we've really lost the ability to deeply connect. So even though technology has brought the world to our doorstep, in many ways, I think our reliance on technology has pushed us even further apart. So that's a lot, Dave, but those are my thoughts of just what I feel has been lost in the last few years.
I really appreciate what you had to share. Daryl and I recently met in Venice at the Biennale. We went away from there and found a little cafe, bistro, and sat down for a good hour and connected lives together, not talking about particularly the profession as much as who we are as humans and what our hopes and ambitions and things were. And that was such a meaningful connection to me, Daryl, that we connected as humans to humans and professionals to professional. It was really rich. And each time I get to see Asian in Singapore, it is the same thing. We connect at a very honest and human level, which is extraordinary. Now, Catherine, I had to go to Venice for the one and Singapore from the other, but you just live a few hours away. We should try that sometime.
We should.
Yeah. Daryl, you've got a lot of thoughts. Some are in connection to responding to, I can see in your face, the responding to some of what Catherine just shared, but I'm interested to hear your response to this question of relevance and forgotten relevance.
Yeah, there's so many threads that interweave here in terms of this issue, and I agree with everything that Catherine has said. But I want to look at the question maybe a slightly different way, and I think it's a really important question that you've posed to us. But I also think the question has some fundamental flaws embedded within it that are part of the problem, and so, if you don't mind, I'm just going to unpack how I view that question, both as a constructive one and one that is perhaps, or at least explore that tension a little bit. And
let's do it.
Certainly, there are when we talk about forgotten relevance, it implies a number of things, and one of them is that there's things that we've left behind or things that we're not paying attention to, and there's no question. I think part of the malaise or the whatever we want to call the trajectory that we're on as a profession is the result of us abandoning traditional areas of our work. And for me, social performance, the social outcomes of our work are elements that for many years and generations and historically we've accepted and embraced as a fundamental part of what we do. And certainly over the last couple of generations, there's been a reluctance to embrace or really consider those issues. And I think we do that at our peril. I think that fundamentally we have these impacts and we need to better understand them. And so that's an example for me of something that we've absolutely left behind that we need to reassert ourselves in. But maybe the other side of that equation in terms of that tension is the notion that we should be looking back for our relevance, that we should be finding our relevance in how it was before, or in some sort of mythical view of the past. I mean, the profession has constantly evolved. It's never been the same, and it's never going to be the same. And I think our relevance in the future is secured by looking to the future and asking ourselves some pretty big questions. Questions like, what does society need from us? How is it that this incredibly unique and valuable skill set can be applied to help solve some of the wicked problems that Catherine referred to? That should be our focus. But instead, as a profession, we spend a lot of energy looking backwards and saying, well, how come we can't do it this way anymore? How come they don't love us? How come we don't have the same influence we used to have? Like all of the things you hear when you get a group of architects together at a reception. We all know the things that get discussed, and they lament for a past that it's much like standing on the side of the road as you get off the sort of the bus, and the bus is driving down the road, and it's like, well, why doesn't it come back? And why is it leaving? The way that buildings are delivered is changing dramatically and is going to continue to change. And it's changing for really good reasons. It's changing because society needs the way buildings are delivered to change. And if we don't adapt to what society needs in that, then our relevance is at threat. And I think we have to ask ourselves some really, really challenging questions. Questions like, what if in the future we don't design buildings? What else might we do? Like what could our skill set be applied to? Or what if we only have a tiny piece of the process? And we need to be okay with what the answers to those questions are, because society will dictate to us what they need from us, and we better be looking for the answers to those questions, and that's the sort of way that we're going to ensure our relevance into the future.
It's interesting because the definition of relevance is pertinent to the matters at hand. Mm-hmm. That's a very present idea, isn't it? It's not a past idea. It's not a future idea. It is a present idea. It is pertinent to the matters at hand, which is this idea of up close and personal. And am I postured? Am I positioned? Am I operating in a place where I am addressing the matters at hand? And what I hear you saying is that society is dictating to us or forming the agenda for the matters at hand. And the question for the architect is, how shall we then respond, right? At the end of the day.
I mean, we exist as a profession. We have a social contract with the public. The public has said, you're providing something that we need. And therefore we grant you the privilege of title, of protected scope of practice, of all of these things that we enjoy. That is not something that's inherent. That's something that has been granted to us, and it can be taken away from us. If society finds a better way to deliver and to have its needs met, it's going to go in that direction. It's as simple as that.
Don't we serve the purpose and values of those who engage us? So unfortunately, Daryl, it's not society that necessarily has you mentioned we have a direct contract with society, but unfortunately, they're not the ones who necessarily engage us. We serve our patrons, we serve our clients. So unless we're working in the context of a public entity and, in the government or public housing, I face this challenge, right? Because we're here to service whoever commissions us. And increasingly, we are here to serve the needs of not so much, landowners or the middle class or the upper class, but it is cooperation. So I think there are many aspects to practice and many people that we serve. So to some extent, our relevance is hinged on that, the priorities and the values. So if it is to seek profit, then it goes against sometimes some of the things we're taught in school, to build for longevity, to last, cultural value. I do feel the conflict where we are now being asked to provide value in a different sense, and financial value, and so on. So it's a difficult question.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. There's no question. And I guess it depends on, like, for me, and maybe I'm like, most of what I do are for public sector clients. And so, maybe, just that I may be naive about some of these greater challenges, but I think it applies, this mindset applies that, we have a direct client, but we have a larger client, and that, ultimately we have to serve the public interest in what we do. We have an obligation, a professional, ethical obligation to do so. And, we have to ask ourselves, like, have we done a good job of that? I think globally we have an incredible housing crisis, an affordability crisis in many, many places in the world, whether it be affordability or just a lack of housing. Well, who designs housing? So have we done a good job? I think we have to actually be willing to say, yes, we have to work with clients, but ultimately, we're not delivering. We haven't delivered the types of cities and the types of communities that the public need to the extent that we can. And so we have to accept our share of that responsibility. Obviously, we can't do it alone. We're not financing our projects and so on, but we play a key role in that. We want to play an even larger role in that. And so we have to, part of our skill and our responsibility is that dual responsibility, both to the client and to the broader society. And it's hard. There's no question it's hard, but we have to find a way.
It's interesting, the mix of the three of you as our guest here today, because HCMA has always been focused on the social value of its practice. And you just heard from Daryl that much of their work is in the public sector, while at WATG, Ijin, almost all of your work in the firm is private investors and corporations. And Catherine, you play that middle spot because LS3P has a tremendous number of public clients as well as private clients. I'd like to hear, how are you navigating what we've just been talking about in this idea of the social responsibility and serving society, in particularly as we've defined it, and addressing the private investor?
Well, our side, we're having to pivot because, the bank world, the financing, many projects are not getting the loans that they need, and we're shifting into other areas, fortunately, because we can. On the issue of affordable housing, an exciting partnership we've had this past year is with Greystar Development, and they built a factory in Pennsylvania and are producing modular units that can be stacked into developments all across the East Coast. And so we've assisted them with the technical aspects, the BIM aspects, and they are slowly starting to roll off the production line. They're working to get more attainable, affordable housing by controlling the entire process. But it's a drop in the bucket to what we need. And I think the other thing to think about is we as architects, we don't control a big part of the market. Single family residential is very rarely, except for custom homes, we're not part of that market. And so that's another thing, is just figuring out how do we do housing differently? As people can't afford to buy a single family home anymore. I mean, the multifamily stuff is still going up like crazy in the Southeast, even with the changes of financing. And, the other parts of the country and other parts of the world may be different, but the need is still there. And we just haven't solved the problem yet, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here, the two of you and Daryl, we live in North America, where there's unbelievable amount of space, right? It's
Right.
a different dynamic than where Asian is living in Singapore. And if you're going to build, you got to go up, right?
Right.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Let's go back to this question of relevance, though. This is central to me. And Daryl posed a question, or kind of threw a gauntlet out about us always being obsessed with looking back, and that the answer to this is looking forward. I actually think it's in between. I think the Roman god Janus, often spelled Janus, Janus is the god that has two faces, if you'll remember that. He's looking back and he's looking forward. It's where we get the month of January from January. And it's the idea of looking back into the year that has passed to bring wisdom forward to the year that is to come. And what do we do? And how do we look with hope into the new future? And I think that there is a criticality for us to not be stuck in an either or proposition, because we tend to throw too much out in our neglect of one to the obsession of the other. And I'm really really appreciate Daryl's challenge, because he has raised this tension, which is live and real, and we live it every day. We cannot get our violins out and lament those nostalgic days that you were talking about, Catherine. Some things are gone. The idea of internships and sitting under a master architect is, wow, what a fantastic luxury that was. And it was true, and it was good. There are other things, as you noted, they were not healthy, nor balanced, nor life-giving. And yet we are too adept, as you were talking and reading about our attention to detail and our focus on the ability to maintain attention. We're too inclined towards throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's a North American term. And it's this idea that, I find something negative, I'm going to throw it all out, and I'm going to go seek something else. And I think that we have to find our balance in addressing this question, but it must be actionable. Things are moving at an unbelievable pace, as we know. And it's critical that this profession moves into this collaborative construct, not just within the firm, but across firms and across society accordingly. Those are some thoughts I have. I'd be very interested. Ijin, you have some more to share with us on some of what we're talking about.
No, I agree that collaboration is key. And we need to get together as a profession to preserve our value. I mean, it's not just financial value. So I thank Daryl for his thoughts, and I recount the fact that in our work we do think about communities as well, the communities in which we build, but it is indirect. It's where we place our projects and the people who work in the buildings. So we do that. Yeah. I think we don't do ourselves justice if we compete against each other, and fall prey to the race to the bottom. I think we need to stand together and share and promote our value to everyone. It's a difficult question.
Yeah,
I think the conversation kind of shifted, or at least referencing, I think, Catherine's comments around the culture of the profession. And I think we could probably spend have an entire talk just about that, but it is a really critical piece. We know we've got some pretty fundamental problems with the culture within the profession. And if we expect to continue to serve society, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror. And this sort of hero worship, the notion of, the elevating the sort of design hero, it is not okay. Like, and it's part of the problem. It's a big part of the problem. And if you look at architectural media, if you look at awards programs, you look at the way we talk about, we have to catch ourselves. The way we talk about a building, we'll say, oh, so-and-so designed that. Well, I bet there was a team of 1,000 people working on that project, right? And so that's a big part of it. But if you look at the diversity within the profession, you look at equity issues generally within the profession, the prevalence of unpaid internships or poor labor practices, that's not okay, And so we have, and the generations that are coming up are not going to accept that. They expect more, and they should expect more. And that, I think, is a really key example of us needing to look at ourselves critically and shed some of this sort of the myths or this sort of romantic notions of architecture as this sort of pastime of the wealthy that are sort of, able to sort of dabble in this pursuit. This is a serious profession that can do a lot of really good things for society. But we have to do that. We can't do that on the backs of unpaid interns and on poorly paid staff. Like, those days have to end.
Well, I think in many ways, Daryl, I mean, the staff shortage, COVID, all of that has pushed to get out of the. I mean, I'm sure all of your firms are having to look very deeply at salaries and the competition between firms now and the fee, the salaries that we're paying, which at the moment feels like we have a real labor shortage in the architecture profession. Swing differently if we go into a recession. But again, I think coming back to some of the things I talked about with the Suskinds is that not every aspect of what we do has to be done by a graduate with a 5 or 6 year master's, and that we need to think differently how the work can get done along with technology and the skills and the craft that we have. The creativity, the design thinking are things that, are unique, I feel, and where is that going to go next, and that hopefully a computer isn't going to replicate that, but that the way that we work and think is what's valuable here. But I think we have to look differently at how the work is parsed out. And that, again, this very putting the fence around it, the barriers to the profession, again, somebody else is going to take it away from us if we don't figure out how to take some of those fences down and open it up more to different folks that are working in different aspects of of the building design. And, again, save more energy for those things that are bespoke, those things that need our minds, solve the problem.
One of the things that I wanted to ask the three of you has to do with design education and pedagogy. All three of you have gone through school. You have your degrees, advanced degrees. Some of you, you had your own experience through the universities, and then now you're hiring and working with new university students coming into the profession. And some of you are still speaking into the university through teaching and things. Where are we from a pedagogy standpoint is when it comes to this question of relevance? We talked about this culture of the architect, right? Does that not initiate within the university? I'm curious where your thoughts are about pedagogy and what has changed maybe from the way you were trained to the way that, and educated, to the way that maybe you're observing how others these days, and that's being done. Don't everybody start at once.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. And I have the privilege of doing some teaching as well, and I was incredibly inspired by the students and where they are in this. But there's no question that culture of sort of just burying yourself in your work and starts in the schools. And the notion of hero worship starts in the schools. I mean, how many studio projects that students are doing are group projects? Most are individual projects, and yet we know we don't work that way. We really need to embed at the core, at the foundation of one's journey in architecture, the notion of collaboration. And but it may be a little bit simplistic, because I do also understand that schools need to teach an array of skills, and I actually think schools do a really good job, and that the schools are ahead of the profession in terms of recognizing the diversity of skills and pathways in the future. And I know here in Canada, we don't have that many schools of architecture, but there's this tension between the profession and the school sometimes in terms of the number that follow a traditional pathway as opposed to go into other industries. And I'm of the mindset that the more people in our society that have an architectural education, the better. And if we don't have enough architects coming through the schools, we need more seats in the schools. We don't need to narrow the options for people with that education. And so I just find that the priorities of the graduates that are coming out of the schools today are very different than the priorities when I graduated, 30 some odd years ago. And I'm far more optimistic about this new generation finding a positive way forward, given the priorities that they're displaying.
Thank you, Daryl. Such a lucid response. Catherine, you are engaged. You do a lot of work at North Carolina State. I know you sit in helping and supporting a doctoral program in design there. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this topic.
Well, I have to agree with Daryl. I mean, I think the students, I think the schools are doing a pretty good job. And the students that we're hiring have been excellent. Most are very technology enabled. And I think a more of a focus on the social issues than perhaps we had coming out. I think they're all very passionate about giving back. Many of the students that join us, we have a program, Design in Kind, where we do pro bono work. And I think many of the students that join us are interested in coming to our firm because of that. But I do think there's still, again, that a little bit of that push of what the profession, the age-old architect on a pedestal. One of the things I have noted, though, at NC other universities is the mental health challenges with students, and COVID has made it even worse. The number of suicides that have happened this last year at NC State have been just horrible. And I think there is more recognition at the design school of not having the expectation and not creating a culture of working 24/7, make a project better. The professors are setting more limits. They are giving students, a 3-day weekend and saying, pens down, mouse down, we want to give you a break. And I think I'm glad to hear that. And I don't know if that's widespread with other design schools, but I hear about that a lot, where they're trying to, consciously focus on the mental health of the students.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Ijin, what are your thoughts on this idea of pedagogy and where we are today versus maybe where you came through the system?
Well, it's evolved. I mean, that every school is different. I find every school has a different priority, but there are some schools here that they're really focusing with equipping students with collaboration skills, as they mentioned, as everyone else, as being more important than your individual, creativity, but the ability to work, the ability to produce many ideas. But the one thing that I observed is that there's a less emphasis in the past. I mean, we talk about the past and the future, understanding why things are the way they are, where they've come from, and the reason. So unfortunately, I feel that is lacking, the appreciation of the past. And quantity seems to be, because it's so easy to produce drawings using technology, qualities sort of valued over quantity is valued over quality. So I think even the schools are facing this challenge of how do you teach discernment and design. The other thing I see that's lacking in education is the more we move into this digital sphere, this numbing of our senses. I mean, we're not using our hands so much. We're not using models. So I feel overall as a society, we're being disconnected. So I don't think that's going to help us in being empathetic, being able to design space. So I see that as a challenge.
That was profound, what you just said about the numbing of our senses in this way. So a final opportunity for you to speak to our audience, a charge. Catherine, what do you want to say to this audience about relevance? And where is your heart on that?
Wow. Again, I've been thinking a lot about the future, and as I mentioned, Daniel Susskind, his speech this last year, I heard one of his points was that you if you think you can just retire and avoid it, that's not going to happen. And that's what I've been thinking about a lot is, okay, I'm going to be out of here before all of these problems are going to continue and somebody else is going to have to figure it out. But gosh, I think we've got to, as you said, look back, but look forward, and that the profession is going to be very, very different in 10 or 20 years. And we have to be part of crafting it and not let others craft it for us. And so I think, again, we've got to start taking some of those walls and fences down and thinking about this differently and inviting more people into the profession, and not lose the craft, but figure out the balance between technology and the brains that we have, the creativity that we have, and try to leverage a balance between the two of those.
Thank you. Yijin, some final charge to our audience.
Well, I think we're powerful within the profession, but also going out of the profession. So the way we're trained to solve problems and the big picture, I think the problem is bigger than solving the problem within the constraints of your site. I think we've got to get out there and rethink how cities and are sustained, or even beyond cities. So get into politics, get into be in a position of influence and look at a bigger picture in terms of solving our challenges.
Express our influence in a broader, in larger context is what I'm hearing you say. Fantastic. Yes. Daryl, bring us home. What did you have to say to this audience?
Well, I probably sound a bit pessimistic, but I have to say I'm actually incredibly optimistic about our ability as a profession to be relevant. And my optimism isn't about relevance for relevance sake. It's that I believe that the skill set that we have as architects is incredibly unique and incredibly valuable, and we don't appreciate the fact that every day in our heads we are balancing multivariable problems. We're balancing things that are in conflict and reconciling that and creating optimal solutions. That type of thinking is how wicked problems get solved, and so I believe that we can apply ourselves not only to physical challenges, and we'll continue to apply ourselves to physical challenges, but non-physical challenges as well. And so I think that society needs us, but we can't take that for granted. We also at the same time have to be willing to look at ourselves in the mirror and challenge ourselves to be better, and challenge ourselves to, be in a better position to serve society, and just to maintain focus on that servant of society mindset. That ultimately is where our relevance is going to come from.
Fantastic. It has been such an honor to be with you today on this broadcast. I just want to say a personal thank you to all three of you who are friends of mine, that you took this time out of your busy schedules Ejan, it's nighttime where you are, and Daryl, the sun's coming up where you are. And Catherine, thank you for stepping out of your very busy agenda to join us on this broadcast.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.